All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Method Made podcast, where we discuss operational challenges in technology transfer in biotechnology. Today, I'm joined by Marina Goldfield. Marina has 2 decades of hands-on experience in manufacturing of biological products, specializing in cell culture and fermentation. So in today's episode, we're going to discuss Marina's sponsor side development experience versus the CDMO perspective in technology transfer, and some direct experiences with tech transfer, both failures and successes. So thank you again for joining us today, Marina. And I'd say the first question I'd like to ask is about the science behind documentation gaps. So when you don't describe or control a process, why does it matter scientifically?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. So the science behind documentation gaps. So where the science catches up with you is because you are dealing with living systems, like living cells that you are trying to get to do something for you. They are very good at these things. They're capable of a lot of amazing, biology and production processes. And that's why we use them as miniature, factories. But the thing is, they are such a product of their environment. They're so attuned to their environment that the slightest change will make them do something different, And unless you had studied that change previously to figure out what the effect is, you are not going to know what's going to happen, which means you don't really know what they'll end up making in the end.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So what might be some of these sort of cell behavior changes you might see?
Oh, anything from, the most common one is they'll stop growing, or in rare cases they'll actually grow faster than you expect them to, which is also not a good sign. Or they might grow fine, but then when it comes time to actually produce something, which usually doesn't get measured until the very end, so you don't really know until you get to the end of your process whether you have something, the product that you want, and it'll be either a lot less than you expected, or nothing at all. And in the most severe cases, you'll actually see the cell culture just die off early. Yeah. So it can be kind of just a whole spectrum of unexpected changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that is what we learn in biology, is it's a product of its environment. So yeah, it's great to sort of hear that. And I'd love to discuss also on a sort of operational level, in the real world in biotech, what the consequences of that are, and sort of how that happens. Yeah, especially considering your sort of process development experience on the sponsor side.
Yeah, so and another part where this matter, which and people might not realize that this is tied back to not having the process defined well enough and documented well enough, is you'll see a lot of variability. So sometimes it will work great, other times it won't. And when those things happen, kind of human intuition tends to take over a lot, and people start coming up with sort of voodoo reasons for why that happened. It was sunny that day versus it was cloudy the day that things didn't work so well. So it must have to it must have to do with the level of sunshine outside. You just get into really sort of let's call it non-scientific reasoning.
Yeah.
And and in reality, it is all explainable. There's no magic in there. There's no bad luck. There's only kind of just a lack of, maybe like not enough understanding over all the things that actually matter to make the process work, to make your cells, behave in an expected way, which means that they are seeing the same environment that they have always seen before.
Yeah, and it makes sense. We expect things to work deterministically, so usually we would expect that there's something that's not controlled that's causing that difference. I wonder if you'd be able to share a sort of a story of, because in my eyes, it's sort of a communication problem when we're getting into this, and sort of between the sending and receiving sites. I wonder if you might be able to give an example of what that kind of communication gap might look like and how best to address it.
Yeah. So it's very important when like transferring these processes. You really need to get into all the little details. There's just no avoiding it. There's kind of no easy way around it. You have to sit down the people that are the subject matter experts that are transferring to whoever's receiving it. You really need to sit down together and hash out all of these details. And this will take a while. This is a long, heavy process. Probably require 2 full days of just sitting in a room and just going over every little thing. And usually in that exercise, you will realize that as much as you try to make things the same between receiving and sending, that's just not going to be possible. In all cases, there are just always limitations that you will have to deal with on the receiving end. And it's important to find out about those early enough that you can actually go back to your lab and just test out that change, just to make sure that it's not going to impact anything about your process. And one of the a really common one of these that I have experienced is just is people not realizing how much longer everything will take in GMP. I mean, you're talking about, you can easily be tripling the amount of time that it takes to do a given step. If it takes you 30 minutes to do something in the lab, I assume it's going to take you 2 hours in a GMP environment. And one, you have to know what those are. You have to talk to the receiving people to understand where that is going to show up in your process. And two, again, you really have to think about the science behind it. What is that going to do to my cells? What are they doing during that long wait period? What else is happening? It's a living system. It doesn't stop. So something is happening there, and you need to understand what that is before you get to the actual running of the process.
Okay, that's great to know. So you mentioned this sort of during the tech transfer, there's this process where the sending site there'll be communication, and it'll sort of surface these differences that you would see between the receiving site and the sending site, and then the sending site would go back to the lab and try to sort of emulate those. So is it through detailed documentation? How do those actually come up, those differences?
Well, it starts with a conversation that ends up in documentation, right? It's like finding out how, from the receiving side, how would you run this? How would you actually do this step? Another really common change is that you're probably used to pipetting everything by hand, which is fast and accurate. a lot of the pipetting will have to be removed when you're moving into GMP, when you're moving into larger scales and into GMP. Once you have to start dealing with closed systems, a lot more, to mitigate again, to mitigate contamination risk. And the other one is just simply volumes. You cannot pipette 2 liters of a liquid. It is just not practical. And so like that's another one that is just a conversation that needs to be had with the receiving people. They will describe how they would approach that particular step, what their facility is capable of, what equipment they have. That you come up with like the solution that you think is best, like the solution that will least affect your process. Document it. This is precisely how this is going to be done. You have to be like specific about the piece of equipment that's used, like add like everything about it, like the settings. And then you also need to go back and check that that this actually works before. You don't want the first time that you're running this to be at a large scale or under GMP conditions. You just do not want that. You need to like de-risk everything before you get there.
Okay, and so you mentioned de-risking and so the detail. I'm sort of seeing that that documenting effectively is sort of a way to reduce that risk as much as possible. I would love to hear about sort of documentation best practices, like how much is enough? Is there too much? When you're engaging in this tech transfer, how much should you write absolutely everything down as the sending scientist, or what does that actually look like?
Absolutely, everything needs to be written down. There's no level of detail that's going to be too much. In my experience, it's always not enough. There was always not enough detail. You always figure out at the end, like, oh, we should have written this down. Oh, we should have written this down. And usually that comes from, those realizations are a result of not having that conversation beforehand, during the tech transfer. But yeah, as far as the detail goes, when it comes to cell culture, no amount of detail is going to be too much. Unfortunately, it all matters, and it's all cumulative, right? All of these like little changes collect together and have a synergistic effect on your cell culture. So it's really important to like not leave anything to chance at all.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm really starting to understand how these the documentation and conversation ahead of time really reduces the chances of these pretty bad consequences downstream. It's been super interesting conversation. One sort of last thing I would love to ask from you is, for new biotech companies that are, say, approaching their first tech transfer, are there some sort of either best practices or general advice you might share for them, as if they don't have that experience going into it for the first time?
I think to not feel, everything that I said previously applies, and I think for maybe a small company that doesn't have a lot of resources, to not feel overwhelmed by all of this, because these things do take time. I think what a small company can do is just start on this process early, on these conversations, on the transfers, on, figuring out what the receiving site is capable of. If you just start on this early enough, you can kind of, you at least have a little bit more time to hash out these details. Unfortunately, you just ignoring them will only make them compound later on when you're dealing with, very expensive, batches that have to be run, and you just do not want to be in a position where the financial resources that takes end up getting wasted. Okay, that that is worse than taking a little bit more time up front to figure this out. And if the company itself doesn't have the resources, then it should look into, and of course I'm a consultant, so I would say this, but look into consultants who can help you with this, who can bring the expertise that you might be lacking.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you for joining us on today's episode of Method Made Podcast. It's been very insightful.
Great, thank you.